The foundation of American democracy, the Constitution, establishes the separation of powers, checks and balances, individual rights, and the rule of law. Executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government were supposed to operate independently and checks the powers of the other. An independent judiciary was supposed to ensure that laws were applied fairly and that constitutional rights were upheld. The media was supposed to provide factual, non-partisan information to the public and expose corruption. But when these guardrails collapse through executive overreach, misinformation, corporate profiteering, and the inevitable erosion of public trust, democracy also collapses. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, a healthy dose of American exceptionalism is currently preventing many citizens from acknowledging this shared reality that an authoritarian regime has completely taken over the US government and is dismantling it, brick by brick. You might not feel it right away, and if you don't engage with politics or if you don't access public services, then it may have evaded you completely. But eventually you'll discover, probably after it's too late, that you took too little interest in the election and the intentions of the MAGA Republicans who had been planning this hostile takeover for years. Hell, they even wrote it down. Donald Trump's flurry of executive orders has significantly expanded his presidential powers in ways that threaten the rule of law and the democratic norms in the US. Among his most controversial actions are the abrupt dismissal of 17 inspectors general, agency watchdogs, without the legally required 30-day notice to Congress, an executive order rejecting birthright citizenship for children of undocumented immigrants in defiance of the 14th Amendment, and mass pardons for more than 1,500 individuals convicted for their roles in the January 6 Capitol attack. After the White House Budget Office issued a directive that could have temporarily blocked $3 trillion in federal funds from reaching various state and federal programs, 23 attorneys general successfully petitioned 2 federal judges to pause the measure. Many of Trump's executive orders were foreshadowed during his campaign, but their sheer number and speed appear to be calculated to overwhelm political opponents, mirroring Trump strategist Steve Bannon's strategy to flood the zone and drown out Democratic resistance and media scrutiny. Trump has justified his dismissals of inspectors general by falsely claiming they are standard and a very common thing to do. Similarly, he has defended his broad use of pardons with the baseless assertion that those convicted were victims of a weaponized Justice Department responsible for a grave national injustice. Former federal prosecutors and legal experts warn that some of Trump's executive actions are eroding the rule of law, but they align with his authoritarian tendencies and his efforts to expand presidential power. Meanwhile, congressional Democrats and labor unions are pushing back against severe cost-cutting measures championed by Elon Musk at the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. The department has come under intense scrutiny for its deep cuts to the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. Around a dozen Democratic members of Congress attempted to enter the Department of Education this morning in response to reports that Trump would soon order it dismantled, but they were denied access. The group tried for about 10 minutes to get in, but were informed they would not be allowed access by a plain-clothed Trump henchman. The police were called and were positioned inside the building's lobby. They left with their tails between their legs. Now, legal experts suggest that Trump's flurry of executive actions is designed to expand presidential authority and may be a strategic attempt to bring certain cases before the Supreme Court, where the MAGA majority could rule in favor of his broad interpretation of executive power. And while congressional Republicans have largely remained silent, Democrats have intensified their opposition. About 24 Democratic state attorneys general have filed lawsuits, and federal judges have temporarily blocked 2 of Trump's most extreme measures. A relentless crackdown on illegal immigration, a hardline approach to law and order, the purging of gender ideology and wokeness from schools, erosion of academic freedom, judicial independence, and a free press, an alliance with Christian nationalism, an assault on democratic institutions. Responding to Trump's order that terminated diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the federal government, the National Cryptologic Museum taped sheets of brown paper over plaques that celebrate women and people of color who have served the National Security Agency, which intercepts overseas conversations and breaks foreign government codes. The authoritarian model of Viktor Orban's Hungary has long been admired by Donald Trump and his Make America Great Again movement. Now, admiration is turning into emulation. In the early weeks of Trump's second term, analysts warn the Urbanization of America is accelerating at an alarming pace. With tech billionaire Elon Musk at his side, Trump has moved swiftly to silence critics, punish the media, reward allies, weaken federal institutions, exploit presidential immunity, and test the limits of his authority. Many of these actions are unconstitutional and illegal, yet with Congress largely powerless, only the federal courts have managed to slow him down. His systemic dismantling of democratic institutions and media control serves as a cautionary tale of how gradual but deliberate changes can pave the way for authoritarianism. His party used its parliamentary supermajority to rewrite the Constitution, to reshape the judiciary and restructure universities to ensure long-term party loyalty. He created a system where financial resources and media control are handed to allies, allowing his government to dominate public opinion and marginalize dissent. Sound familiar? The Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, a far-right blueprint for Trump's second term, reflects many of Viktor Orban's strategies. Orban has actively cultivated ties with Trump's inner circle, speaking at the Conservative Political Action Conference and meeting with Trump and Musk at Mar-a-Lago. On his first day back in office, Trump pardoned 1,500 individuals involved in the January 6 insurrection, including those who assaulted Capitol Police officers. Driven by vengeance, he fired federal prosecutors investigating him and hinted at broader purges within the FBI. Following Orban's example, Trump has intensified cultural warfare. He issued executive orders banning transgender athletes from women's sports and forced a federal task force led by Attorney General Pam Bondi to root out what he calls anti-Christian bias in government. His administration is working to sideline mainstream media while elevating a right-wing ecosystem of influencers and podcasters. Former Trump White House speechwriter Darren Beattie is back, appointed as the State Department's acting Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. Despite writing on X, competent white men must be in charge if you want things to work, and unfortunately our entire national ideology is predicated on coddling the feelings of women and minorities and demoralizing competent white men. Musk's platform, X, has become a powerful far-right propaganda tool, while Facebook has dropped fact-checking and efforts are underway to bring TikTok under U.S. control. Trump has even sued major news outlets over negative coverage, with some settling under pressure. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is rotating out 4 major news organizations from its press pool, replacing them with Trump-aligned outlets. Perhaps the most dramatic transformation has been Trump's assault on the federal government. He's fired at least 17 inspectors general, dismantled key agencies, halted federal funding to states and nonprofits, and openly defied Congress's constitutional role in allocating federal funds. Government workers face pressure to resign, entire departments are being shuttered, and federal data is being handed over to Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency, raising concerns about conflicts of interest and misuse of public funds. Musk's allies even orchestrated a hostile takeover of USAID, locking out employees and vowing to dismantle the agency. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stepped in as acting administrator, but Musk celebrated on X, boasting, "We spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper." Musk's influence extends to the Office of Personnel Management, the OPM, where federal employees are being offered buyouts while loyalists are installed in key positions. People being forced to resign, being bribed with 8 months' pay that they might never receive. His team is pushing for a 50% budget cut and implementing zero-based budgeting at the General Services Administration, which oversees federal contracts and properties. Despite holding billions in government contracts himself, Musk now wields immense unchecked power over Washington. Unsurprisingly, a wave of lawsuits seeks to halt many of these moves. Protests are erupting outside government agencies and congressional phone lines are overwhelmed. But those sounding the alarm face retaliation. Edward Martin, the interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, threatened legal action against anyone who impedes DOJ's operations or harasses its personnel. We are coordinating with the FBI and other agencies to take rapid action, Martin posted on X, warning that prosecutors were ready. For now, the courts remain a check on Trump's power. Judges have temporarily blocked his attempts to end birthright citizenship, slash the federal workforce, and freeze funding, but with Congress sidelined, civil service protections eroding, and executive power consolidating, the threat to American democracy is complete. There is literally nobody to counter the burning down of American institutions. And when our politicians fail us and the courts fail us, it seems that only the collective power of people may be the only way to be heard. Some talk of a national strike, withdrawing labor, holding the country to ransom, peaceful protest and engaging with representatives, and remembering always that there are more of us than there are of them. I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with Midas Touch.